Hello, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us today from wherever you are in the world and the millions of you dialing in from home. My name is Tim Wolford, and I work in the product marketing team here at Microsoft, working on all things SIM and XDR and security, as we've been listening to Rob and Eric and Ping and Bernard sort of walk us through some of those critical updates that we're seeing in the space, both out in the world and in our own portfolio. So we hope that you've enjoyed the session tackling the biggest cybersecurities for 2022, and as that's very, very quickly approaching. And like I said, thank you for joining us for this Ask the Experts session. And I hope you've brought a lot of great questions, and we have some awesome panelists here to help answer those and give you the latest and greatest. So what to expect? I'll give you a quick introduction of who we've got here on the panel today, and a little bit of housekeeping as well. The code of conduct is posted in the chat there for you, so thank you for reading that already and abiding by the conditions there. Questions will appear once they've been approved and also answered by the team of about a dozen experts we have working on the chat behind the scenes, and also the ones that we do address in person. You'll see that expert pop up on the screen on video, and we'll walk through those together. The session will be recorded. Please don't spam the Q&A, and like I said, please adhere to that code of conduct that is pasted in the chat there for you already, and I'll give you 2 seconds just to read it here as we've posted it here as well. So just as a quick reminder, we've just come off the back of that session. We learned all about SIM and XDR. We learned about ransomware, Defender for IoT, Defender for Cloud, Defender for Cloud Apps. So there's a lot of really exciting new stuff going on out in the world. Think about threat intelligence, lateral movement, zero trust. Any questions that you might have, please start dropping those into the chat and we will get to them. So who we have today, I will be the moderator. We have Mr. Scott Woodgate, Senior Director of Product Marketing for SIM and XDR, Nicholas DeCola, the Partner Director of CXE, Steve Newby, who's a Senior Program Manager in our Customer Excellence and Success team, and Mr. Jeff Chin, all the way from Canada, who's a Principal Technical Specialist out in our field. So without further ado, please let's dive into some questions. So the first question here is actually about ransomware. So maybe Scott, if you want to tackle this one. Human-operated ransomware is getting a lot of media attention. For some, it appears maybe that it's blown out of proportion a little bit when compared with the actual risk. Having said that, if enterprises are really worried and concerned about ransomware, and we all should be very aware about it, what are the most important steps for protecting organizations against ransomware?
Yeah, so firstly, addressing your question, certainly human-operated ransomware is top of mind for many customers today. I'm not sure it's being blown out of proportion. It's a basic economics model where the bad actors have determined that they can make money off companies, and companies are willing to pay to get their data back. And while that economics model exists, the bad actors will continue to be motivated to compromise our customer base and go ahead and set upon them with ransomware to get paid. In terms of protecting, absolutely the first step in anything is always prevention. Making sure that on the identity side you've set up multi-factor authentication is one of the key things. Making sure that you're patched. These are not, as Rob talked about in the earlier session, things that we haven't been saying for years and years and years, but they tend to be far more common than the zero-day attacks when it comes to ransomware. Making sure that you're continually applying best practices across each of your pieces of infrastructure in your end user environment in terms of securing them up is critical. And so prevention is the #1 thing. Obviously, if you have data, you want to make sure your data is backed up. So if you do get into a state where your data gets encrypted, you can go ahead and recover it. So that's an important piece. And then finally, you want to be forever diligent on understanding if there are attackers in your environment. And so this is where the SIM and XDR tools come together, piece together events that may start from a social attack through phishing, for example, over email and land through the overall system. So also applying a diligence on the reactive side. But totally right that prevention is really important, and it's often the basics that are the critical things to fix.
Makes sense. Thank you, Scott. And Jeff, I'm seeing quite a few questions here, sort of about the integration of SIM and XDR and why and how you might sort of use the two together. You and I have spoken about this on a number of occasions. I wonder if you can sort of give a high level sort of view of why you might use a SIM and an XDR tool.
Yeah, one of the things that's most valuable, specifically inside the ecosystem that Microsoft provides, is there's a very heavy standardization of data in terms of how it's normalized. So having that data normalized, first of all, on your larger attack surface, where XDR would provide terrific visibility from an email, identity, cloud apps, EDR, having those build and produce high fidelity, high quality, normalized alerts on a normalized data set, then bringing that together into a SIM to extend it out to the more traditional senses, such as the network condition signals, or maybe even extending visibility into other mechanisms of attack, for example, where resources could be misused inside cloud applications, inside various clouds, be it inside Google, AWS, and of course, Azure. I think those are one of the things that you really need to be able to consider, right? Is that we have a high volume attacks coming. There's where XDR comes from. To understand the depth of those attacks and how to bring in forward mitigations so that, one, they don't happen again, or the inevitable question, how long has it been happening for? These are things that have to very obviously be extended out into a SIM. Probably the tertiary component, which many organizations are just starting to get to now, is really around the aspect around automation. So many times, obviously, automation is important, but it's obviously not just consolidated inside what people are doing inside XDR. So being able to extend that automation into various other platforms, be it your application platforms, be it inside PaaS services that may be attacked, these are things that are only available through connecting it properly with the SIM. And with a SIM like Sentinel, where there is no requirement for infrastructure, it is infinitely scalable. The ability to respond to these at tremendous scale is actually very simple, right? And that's not going to be the case very often with products which may carry a more infrastructure-based approach to supporting the data infrastructure and subsequently multiples of different plugins in order to facilitate things like automation.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Nicholas, a couple of questions here that have kind of come up around sort of cloud and posture and almost it looks kind of like internal culture within a company. How would you approach sort of answering these questions around how do I influence a move to a more secure culture within a company, and especially when you're thinking about sort of cloud applications and that multi-cloud perimeter of an organization?
Yeah, great question. Changing security culture in a company is never easy. It's you have to be persistent, and it has to start everywhere, right? Even shifting left with the developers and getting them involved as early as possible to help prevent code from being deployed in an insecure model. But using cloud posture security management across many clouds, doesn't matter whether it's AWS, GCP, or on-prem, to really get a view of everything you have across the environment. And then taking that, in our instance in Azure, we use Secure Score to give you those recommendations based on kind of a priority list that you can go work off of, right? And so starting with the topmost one, which is always MFA, enabling MFA for those accounts, and kind of going down the list and just working with the teams one by one to kind of tackle those and look at ways to, one, use policy to prevent that from being deployed in the environment in the future, as well as remediate anything that's been deployed already. So it's just kind of building a process around it and continually working through that process.
Thank you. And we've sort of spoken about ransomware a little bit already, but I want to revisit it just because we're getting so many questions here, and I see a lot of them are being addressed in the chat there as well. But Steve, joins us all the way from the UK. But Steve, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on what you're seeing in your conversations with customers. Some of these questions coming through here are along the lines of what are other customers seeing? Not so much what they're doing, but how much of a threat is it? Talk to us a little bit about sort of your experiences out in the field. And you're on mute, Steve.
Yeah, so thanks, Tim. So the where we see the sort of different industries, they're seeing different challenges. If you look at the banking, there's very much a big focus around identity. The announcements we had today around IoT are huge as well, because IoT devices are being compromised primarily because they're often not managed. So we're seeing this time and time again. Unmanaged devices are being compromised, which then provide an inroad into an organization. So where you've got a maybe Raspberry Pi devices being used by organizations, or you've got OT devices being used, it's important to identify those and then actually do something about them. So whether that's just monitoring the status of that device, whether there's a vulnerability on that device, these are all things that need to be addressed and pulled into a management scenario. So we've got the Defender for IoT, but we've also got IoT identification within Defender for Endpoint. And those two technologies will work together to provide cross communication around the status of those devices and provide vulnerability assessments around those through Defender for IoT as well. So by targeting those sort of devices, you're cutting off a big vector in terms of a threat within an organization.
Thank you, Steve. Question for you, Scott. Today we renamed MCAS to Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. What do you see as sort of the big benefit of bringing MCAS under the Defender umbrella and some of the new and exciting features that we can expect from that?
Yeah, makes sense. So in terms of MCAS, I know we've been working hard at increasing customer satisfaction using the existing product. We've made tremendous strides in things like reliability, frankly, over the last 12 months. So that's been a big thing. We're now going back into an innovation cycle in the next 12 months, now that we've really improved the overall reliability of the service. In terms of naming doesn't necessarily change a set of features. It is just simply recognition that when you have an XDR strategy, you should also be protecting your apps. And obviously one of the core things that the Defender for Cloud Apps does is protect access to SaaS apps. So it's an important part of any XDR strategy is to deploy that capability.
Thanks. And Nicholas, another good one here for you. When you think about Sentinel as a SOAR, if you enable ingestion for all your different data points, what are some of your personal favorite playbooks that you would recommend people implement?
Yeah, great question, considering I've written many of the playbooks we have in our playbook gallery in Sentinel now, Microsoft Sentinel as it's been rebranded. Yeah, I wouldn't say like here's a specific one, but what I would recommend that I want people to take away is more of a mindset of start with those tier 1 alerts. What is your SOC actively like working on a day-to-day basis, and ask yourself, can I automate this? Right? Like an impossible travel, can I go ahead and just send the user a new MFA or reset their password if we get an impossible travel for them, and take that workload off the SOC, right? So it's not about best playbook, it's one that can reduce the amount of workload for your SOC and really think through those. And we have a couple customers that have stopped any tier 1 alert if it's not automated. Like that's their first job, is to automate it. Like they don't respond to them at all. They'd use automation to triage them. And that would be my recommendation to customers, is not best playbook, but what's going to give you the most bang for your buck and reduce that workload for the SOC.
Makes sense. Thank you. And a couple of questions have come up here, sort of thinking about the coming year and sort of what we might expect. And Jeff, maybe a question for you and some of the conversations that you've had with your customers. You know, we just listened to Rob and Eric talk in detail about, you know, sort of mitigating threats and thinking about the coming year. But, you know, for you, we're almost 2 years deep into quite a unique working and security environment. What do you see as the biggest security threats that you're seeing with customers over the next 12 to 24 months?
Most customers today are sort of comfortable about understanding the risks around ransomware, as you know, Scott had put together. I think the thing that's on the mind for a lot of customers today is, what about the next supply chain attack? How do I take into perspective, you know, the next SolarWinds or the next anything where, you know, signed trusted code is delivering payloads to my environment? And they're sort of covering themselves in two perspectives, right? One is, do I have tooling that can sufficiently deliver telemetry that would either allow me to determine with my own mechanisms if something is suspicious? And then can I trust in how the EDR or XDR platform is performing to provide sufficient coverage in order to facilitate detections of that nature too? So I think that's something that happens for all types of tooling, but when you talk about sign code delivery of malware, it becomes extremely sensitive. Something that's actually coming up more and more, because we've seen a lot of critical infrastructure be the target of some of these very advanced attacks, it's that ability to forensically analyze, right? And so for many of these folks today, it's they're working together with agencies to determine not only the scope of the breach, and I think that's normal, it's also how long has this persisted? When did we first start seeing things come together? And I think that this is that contribution that most organizations are trying to give back in order to try and solve the problem. So at the moment, a lot of our conversations still have to do a lot around data telemetry, how that data comes into play, how it is sort of brought together from a machine learning perspective to provide detections. And I think you're always going to have those conversations with customers, and there's always going to be that doubt, can I test what they're saying that they can do? But then the other side is, how do I scale the data collection that I've had so far, and can that data actually be analyzed to determine the scope of the breach and when it first happened? And we're seeing a ton of customers now explore, various cloud-based storage components, such as, not the product name, but specifically, with Azure Sentinel and Azure Data Explorer, there's a infinite amount of time that a lot of data can be held. And so I think those are things that as you take a look at those tools tied together, there is a merge of forensics and detection that can actually start to benefit customers. And I think that they don't have to be independent, as we've been working for in a while. So that's my take, at least for the first little while, and how people have been going. And we'll see how it evolves. But supply chain is very high concern at the moment.
Makes sense. Thanks, Jeff. And Nicholas, Jeff brought up a couple of interesting points around sort of data retention, persistence, and there's a few questions here in the chat as well that sort of refer to hunting and being able to reflect on some of that data. What do you sort of think about in terms of hunting? What are some of the key use cases you see with customers and some of the things that you would suggest?
Yeah, hunting's interesting, right? Because most SOCs are kind of overloaded with just responding to what's coming in. But with hunting, you really have to take a proactive approach and start asking really unique questions, right? So, for example, maybe I want to go look for processes that are running in the environment by lowest count, right? Like I want to see those things that are really odd that are running in the environment and understanding if that process might be malicious. And then you have to take that, go investigate, and determine whether it's actually kind of a malicious process or there. So it takes a very, I wouldn't say very, but a little bit different of a mindset when you start to think about hunting. But the great thing is we have some awesome tools and really some great starting points in our template library of hunting queries in Microsoft Sentinel that can help frame that for the SOC engineers as they start to go down that road.
Awesome, thank you. And Scott, another one here for you. We talked a little bit earlier, or Rob and Eric did at least, about Defender for Business. And so if we're sort of thinking about small and medium businesses who may or may not have a dedicated security team or a resource, how should they be thinking about security? What's the best possible way without or with the least amount of compromise for them to be able to achieve the type of security that we talk about? We could have third-party options or first-party. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so for small and medium businesses, which we characterize as 300 seats or less for Defender for Business, obviously protecting endpoints is important. Many of those customers can't afford the full-blown protection that you'd expect, including EDR and threat and vulnerability management and so on, and or have legacy antivirus-based systems rather than the next generation EDR capabilities. And so we saw an opportunity to help our small and medium business customers really get their endpoints protected and released this new SKU, which is called Defender for Business. Once again, really targeting 300 seats or less. Actually has all of the capabilities of the E5 version, if you want to think of it that way, of Defender for Endpoint available to the smaller customer with some simplified configuration and setup, recognizing that customer, you don't need a lot of complexity when you're in an SMB and you only have a small number of security folks. So we're really excited about it. And as Jeff pointed out in the earlier session with Vasu, it supports Lighthouse, and we expect a lot of partners in the SMB segment to really play with that as well. While I'm at it, if you don't mind, I know I've had a bunch of questions around the Defender P1 SKU as well. So we also made an announcement, perhaps not quite as visible, around a new P1 SKU for Defender for Endpoint. And this, in contrast to the SMB SKU, is more of a cost-effective SKU. It's a foundational set of capabilities around endpoint protection. It includes, unified management, obviously, next generation antivirus, attack surface reduction rules, network protection, web control, etc. It does not include EDR, automated investigation and remediation, threat and vulnerability management, or threat analytics. And so this is a base capability that's available for, I guess, all customers to buy. So typically outside of SMB. And in some point in the future, next year, it will also be included as part of the E3 SKU. So it's effectively, you want to think about it as a lower priced foundational set of capabilities there for broad customers. Certainly our hero SKU there is still E5 with all of the EDR and threat vulnerability management and incident response it has in it.
Thank you, Scott. You beat me to my next question about P1, so that's awesome. We can move right on to the next one. Steve, a question for you. As we look at how the way we work is changing, and we've talked a lot about people going remote, but as we start to think about people moving back to the workplace and sort of these hybrid kind of work from home, work from office, bring your own device environments that we're all in, what are some of the conversations you're happening? What's interesting there? What are some of the challenges? And are there sort of concerns about how much control is kind of in the hands of the end user?
So the interesting thing about that is you've gone from an environment where people have been managing devices. They've been Active Directory domain join. They'll have had SCCM managing these devices. They'll be patching these devices using those technologies. And then people have stepped away from that. So they've stepped out into the home office. In a lot of cases, they'll have VPNs. VPNs are a great way to sort of still extend that management. But there are concerns around the VPN being compromised. Is there issues around maintaining that? So as we move more towards this hybrid approach, the use of things like Azure domain joined, managing things directly from MEM. So Microsoft Endpoint Manager is a big focus for us now. And that allows the management of the device. It allows us to apply security principles down onto that device without the need for an infrastructure to support it, because everything is coming from the cloud. So as people change the way they work, as they become more mobile, utilizing this technology around MEM, tying Defender into that, and obviously Defender integrates very tightly with MEM. It's used as the management plane. It's used for deploying policy down to that device. So you have less dependency upon infrastructure that's in the office. And this is really the way people are changing the way they work. They're much more mobile, they're home working. So we need to look at new technologies and the way to address that. And utilizing the cloud technologies is the way to achieve that without compromising whether the security profile of a device. And there was also a question around MBAM and how you take BitLocker pins from MBAM into the cloud. Actually, when you do an Azure domain join of a device and you encrypt it, that pin, the recovery key, is stored in the cloud. So the user has the ability to go through a web portal and recover their own key, but also an administrator can go through the Azure portal and recover the key for that user. So yes, there's a lot of old ways of doing things, but we like to think that the new way of doing things with Windows 11, with the cloud technology that we have, will give people a better security posture in that sense.
Thank you, Steve. And this might be one for you, Scott, and or Nicholas. Thinking about IoT, we've had a lot of questions here, obviously, about ransomware, but I think one of the next sort of most common ones is around IoT, OT devices and the challenges associated there. As we think about, these types of attacks, why do you think people go after production operations like pipelines or sort of critical infrastructure? And how do you think today's announcement, will change that?
Nicholas, do you want to stab and I'll follow?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's if you're an attacker and you want to hurt or harm a business, right, which is the intent with ransomware, and most businesses operate some type of OT, IoT network, like that's a way that you stop business, right? Like stop a manufacturing plant's robots from actually doing their job, and that's really, really hurtful to a business. Which is why we've seen these campaigns shift to this more human-operated ransomware model, because it can actually stop a business versus, maybe just a cleanup of a few PCs that got attacked or something like that. So yeah, it's kind of the next big thing, and part of that is being that for so many years the OT networks have just been kind of there and running, and they do what they do for the business, but haven't been monitored or watched from a security perspective. And so it's another kind of attack vector that is very easy for attackers to take into account or use. You want to add anything, Scott?
Yeah, I guess I would say, as a general statement, many of these OT devices live for a really long time, and often, even past the end of service of operating systems. And so you'd be surprised the number of old operating systems that are running on, PLC devices in industrial environments, because they just don't get changed very often. And so these devices in particular are very vulnerable. And many companies don't have great protection for OT. And certainly it's something that's super important. It's the reason why a couple of years ago we bought a company called CyberX. It's now Defender for IoT. And it's really is the basics often in the OT environment that are really important to get in place. And they just weren't part of the architectural design of building OT environments 5 or 10 years ago. So if you have OT inside your business, there is likely urgent short-term need to deploy a security solution there.
Thank you both. And we have so quite a few questions sort of coming through around SIEM and XDR. And Scott, I know you tackled this right at the beginning, sort of about the integration, and Jeff, you talked to it as well about why you might sort of use the two together. But there's quite a few questions coming through. We have this offering of SIEM and XDR between Microsoft Sentinel, Microsoft 365 Defender, and Microsoft Azure Defender for Cloud. There's a couple of questions here around how you actually go about buying and implementing those. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the initiatives that are coming and how someone might get engaged with those platforms?
Scott, did you want to go first?
Sure. I was trying to pass the question, actually. I mean, how you buy them and get engaged with them. I'd start with the trial, I guess. I'm pretty excited that today we are announcing a 30-day trial. I know we've already had some requests for can it be more than 30 days, and we'll take that in consideration as we move further forward. But we have a completely free 30-day trial for Azure Sentinel today, which is awesome. So sign up for that, get some information going into the system in terms of data, understand some analysis. That's a great way to get going. In terms of going the next level beyond the trial, obviously we can help you from a direct sales engagement, either through partners who can run workshops or through our direct sellers, depending on the size of the organization you are, and take you through the full portfolio of Sentinel and Defender and how they work together. From a purchase perspective, there's a lot of options and a lot of flexibility there. Sentinel is a consumption-based business, charge dollars per gig is the short version of that. The E5 license is a great way, but not the only way to buy the broader SIEM and XDR capabilities. Jeff, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I would say also, like, if you actually think about the construct of Microsoft, we are no longer one of those organizations that you have to buy sort of everything at once, right? One of the key questions is like, how do I buy XDR? Well, actually, everyone has XDR, right? All you have to do is turn on the appropriate tools by deploying them. So if we assume that I'm correct and everyone has XDR, and you start to load in your EDR information, great, that becomes part of the XDR equation. Then you turn on, for example, Microsoft Defender for Office or Microsoft Defender for cloud apps. Once those tools turn on, their telemetry will start to flow in. And so it's not like you have to buy everything in order or license everything in order to facilitate full XDR. We will use the full gamut of what's available in order to perform those XDR grade of detections. And the same goes with Azure Sentinel, right? Is once you have a set of high fidelity data that you get from the XDR platform and you decide to bring those in, machine learning type fusions come into play. If you have not had a chance to look at the user behavior table inside Azure Sentinel, I guarantee you that once you start looking at that, you will stop looking at sign-in logs the way you have been for the last 10 years. And these are the types of things that, as you consume, you receive more benefits. So take a heavy look at your use cases and how they can be reflected and protected in against specific tools, and then we will help to drive that correlation together in XDR and subsequently into third parties through Azure Sentinel and to provide that additional automation.
Awesome, thank you. And I know we a minute over and right at time. So thank you very, very much for joining us. We appreciate you leveraging this opportunity to engage directly with us. It's always great to get this feedback. And there's a lot of great questions there in the chat that I know we have people tirelessly working behind the scenes to answer those. So hopefully we will get to all of those. And thank you to all the live questions. Thank you very, very much to our experts. There is a link there on the screen, WAC, SIM, and XDR, where you can go and learn more about these products and platforms. Your feedback is important. Please use the session evaluation, and we will see you at some more Ignite events. Thank you very much.